What would the world look like if people felt like they mattered? Welcome to the Lead with Love podcast, exploring what it means to lead with love in business and life. I'm your host, Tara Mohr, and in this show, I'll share meaningful conversations to help you, the creative, the entrepreneur, the world changer, reach more people, go after your dreams, and serve your community with love. I appreciate you joining me. Now let's get cozy and start today's episode. Hi, you're listening to episode 110 of the Lead with Love podcast. And in today's conversation, I get cozy with Tara Mohr, the author of Playing Big, Practical Wisdom for Women Who Want to Speak Up, Create, and Lead. Now, I actually have 2 print copies of this book and the audio version. That is how much I personally love this body of work when it comes to women's leadership. I have 1 copy on my personal bookshelf and 1 I always bring to the business visionary retreats that I lead. I also gift this book to my clients. Tara just has a very magical way of really bridging those conversations and the things that are going on in our heads as women when we're stepping into our leadership. Tara is also the creator of the Playing Big leadership program for women and also Playing Big facilitators training for coaches, mentors, and managers who support women in their personal and professional growth. So some things that we talk about are why Tara initially resisted her calling to step into the personal development space. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely faced the resistance to my calling as well. We also talk about ways she's been able to stay creatively engaged in sharing her work after offering her leadership program for over 7 years. And the cool thing is the Playing Big model has been part of leadership development programs at companies like Starbucks and Google. And her work has also been featured on the Today Show and in publications ranging from the New York Times to Goop to the Harvard Business Review. We also talk about scaling in business, and this conversation was really, really fun. And talking about what playing big really means to Tara, and having had several personal conversations with her, how she defines playing big is probably not what you think. So if you want the full show notes, you can go over to jadaselner.com/110, and all of the important links will be over there. Now let's get started. We have Tara Mohr here. Hi, Tara.
Hello.
Oh, so good to connect with you today.
I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Awesome. And I love the circle of our friendship. You wrote an amazing book called Playing Big, and it's one of my go-to books that I listen to. And then I also read through it, the print version, to underline all the things. So I'm super, super excited to dive more into that, because I think the conversation about women using their voice and stepping into that leadership role is so important. And I remember, I reached out to you when Jen and I were first publishing our book, and in that whole, getting the book deal process, and you were one of the few people where I'm like, will you hop on a phone with me? And I remember just being in New York City, and you were so gracious with your time and just going through the whole process. So I just want to thank you for your wisdom and availability to help a fellow future published author out in that moment. Because
thank you. Thank you for reminding me about that. I didn't even remember about that. I'm thinking about times that we have a lot of mutual friends. So times we've had fun conversations at parties, and times I've learned a lot from you from your business journey. So yeah, lots of
Yeah. Yeah. That's just one of my favorite moments. And I know we would meet at Sarah Jenks' annual holiday party, which was lots of fun. And we did an episode with her, and she's just the connector. She is the glue of all the people. It's like, how did I meet this person? It was probably Sarah.
Right. Best guess through Sarah.
Yeah. Awesome. So I would love to lead with a question that is near and dear to my heart. And it is, what does leading with love mean to you? And how do you put that into practice in your own business?
I really love that question. And it is something I think about a lot in my own way. I love the prayer, the intention, which I originally learned from one of Marianne Williamson's books, probably 20 years ago now, which is, may I be a representative of love. I love that formulation. Like, there is an energy of love, and my intention during the day is, as close as I can get, let me be a representative of love. And also knowing, as a human being, I'm going to fail at living up to that completely. Fear is going to get mixed in there, and lack of clarity is going to get mixed in there, and all that stuff. But what a powerful North Star to have. And I find that in my life and my business, like, that intention really helps me. May I be the representative of love in this situation? May I be a representative of love in this conversation? Just to tap into that energy. And I think that for me, that is like, it's both that it helps me actually be much more effective because it takes me out of all my own BS and issues and ego. And then it also gives me a lot of direction and purpose, which is really, for me, things get much more interesting and joyful when I have like a direction that I am not just pointing my work in, but pointing myself in. And so it gives me that too.
I love that. And I love seeing it in a space of like, this is my prayer. This is my intention. Oh, so good. You mentioned the kind of the BS, the BS voice and the fear and lack of clarity. And you really talk a lot about this in Playing Big. And there's something that I'm so fascinated by, and I keep coming back to, and I share it with my own clients that I serve, is about the 6 ways that women hide their voices. And there's the this before that, which is the sequencing, and then designing at the whiteboard, which, like, raising my hand super high, I'm so guilty of, because I'm like, I'm a visionary. I love doodling and brainstorming and white paper. And then you have kind of overcomplicating the process, right? Of over polishing, or we can say perfectionist in recovery, and then collecting everyone else's ideas, omitting your own story, and also that endless research, more education, more certifications. And I'm so curious, which of those have been the loudest for you?
Great question. Yeah. And if I can, I'd love to back up a little bit, share more about the kind of how naming those came about for me, and how doing this work came about. So for me, ever since I was very young, like, maybe age 5, around there, I remember noticing that women and women's voices seemed to be missing from everywhere. And so I couldn't figure out, like, what, my family will go to religious services, but there's no women in front of our congregation. Or I see we're watching the news, but none of the people talking but giving their opinions are women. And then as I got a little older, like, well, how could we be studying these different periods in history class, but there's never a mention of a woman? Like, surely there were women there at that period in history. And again, seeing that. And I think it's very mysterious for each of us in our individual paths, what pains us and what kind of calls out to us in terms of the different problems and needs in the world. But for me, that was when it just felt, each one of those was like, I felt the pain of that, and I felt frustration about it. And I also felt like I got a surge of energy to do something about it. And so even when I was in school, I was going to my teachers and saying, why aren't we learning about women? And trying to work on that in whatever small ways I could. And then I came into the working world as a young woman. And this is, in a prior career, pre-coaching, pre-entrepreneurial path. I was working in the nonprofit world for a large philanthropic foundation, and really just saw so clearly how the top echelon of the organization was almost entirely men. And there were so many talented, highly capable women who were doing good work in the organization, but not getting the level of visibility or title or compensation or really power that the quality of their work merited. So that was interesting to see. And that was like, is this my future career path? Is becoming, becoming one of them, kind of like a woman working really hard and doing great work, but kind of buried and lost inside a big organization. Like that didn't seem so good. And then what was really striking was my friends were in all different industries than me, and yet their stories sounded exactly like mine. It was like, one of my best friends works in an architecture firm, and she's like telling me, well, the same thing is going on in her architecture firm. And then this friend over here was in the social justice world, and she's seeing the same dynamics. So that was upsetting. Like here we were, all these women, a few years into our working life, really starting to see the same dynamics quite widely spread and very different than the message most of us were given, which was like, oh, good, honey, you're being born into the post-feminist era. Everything's equal now. You have nothing to worry about. Go do whatever you want to do with your life.
Right.
That's not what we were seeing. So all that was happening in terms of what I was observing. And then at the same time, I was coming up on 30 and kind of like, okay, I'm not in my first couple exploratory years of working anymore. I'm 30, and I could see that if I just let the years go by, I could have easily just do this job for quite a long time or do jobs like it, and then end up feeling a lot of regret, because although there was a lot I liked about the job, I kind of was getting clear, like, this is not what I am here to do. This is a safe place for me, but it's a hiding place. And I was slowly coming to terms with the fact that I wanted to work in the world of personal growth and psychology and spirituality, which was very hard for me to accept because I was coming out of this very left brain, fancy educational background where everything that I loved was deemed naive and woo-woo by that world. And so, eventually I admitted to myself, I want to go in this, I've been going to New Age bookstores every day. That's what I used to do after school, every day. And that's that. And I want to, and I'm going to Esalen and the retreat centers, that I started doing that, when I was 14. I'm begging my parents, can I go on a meditation retreat by myself? So I came to terms with that's the work I want to do. And I will never forget telling my husband one day, I was tearful. I was honey, I want my work to be in that, and he was looked at me with the most compassion and was like, are you just figuring that out? That's what you want to do. And also, don't you remember the time, you already told me that 5 years ago, right? But that time I was ready. And so I started getting trained as a coach, just sort of as some pathway into that world. It wasn't that I was locked on coaching, but I knew, okay, it would start taking me in that direction. I was working with a coach for the first time also. And then when I started my coaching training, part of the curriculum at the Coaches Training Institute, where I was doing my certification, was you started working with practice clients right away who were just paying you $25 a month, literally $25 a month, but for 3 sessions, because our faculty was don't charge them. You're not good at this yet. This is not worth very much yet. It's just practice for you. And so I was doing that, and I was seeing this really strong pattern of all of these brilliant women clients, just like the women I worked with at my foundation, who had great ideas and were super conscientious and ethical and visionary people. And as much as I was seeing in them so many things that was oh my God, you need to be running our world, then I was hearing from them, but I'm not ready yet. Or if that was a good idea, someone else would have been saying it, or I need to get a degree exactly in that thing to be able to do it. Like all these different ways of not seeing themselves as enough, as ready, and therefore stalling or getting stuck in self-doubt. And so that experience of working with them and then slowly making that the focus of my coaching practice and then really trying to figure out what was helpful to them, that's what all led to the tools and concepts that became the Playing Big model. Became first the focus of an online course and then a book, and now both a book and an online course and lots of other stuff. So that's the bigger story.
Yeah. I mean, such a beautiful journey. There was a couple of things I heard in there. One, really hearing that calling loud and clear, but taking a few years for you. The rest of the world already sees it, but taking a couple of years for you to own it and kind of like coming out of the closet of like, I want to be in the woo world and I want to do coaching. I think that's just such a beautiful testament to you in, having that conversation with yourself and then finally being ready to actually make that transition, which I know so many women stay in that in-between stage for so long.
It's a really interesting thing to draw out, because I think that for a long time I thought like, oh, I have made this departure from my path and I lost those years when I was doing something else. And if only I had been more brave or more this or more that, maybe I wouldn't have. But the truth is now I think it's the rare exception to the rule when someone like charges right into their path. And that for most of us, we're just like the hero in the hero's journey, right? The journey of our own lives that, when Joseph Campbell mapped out the stages of the hero's journey, hearing the call is the first stage and resisting the call is the second stage.
Yes.
It's like the formal stage, like it's part of the path, right? So that is what happens for most of us. And I kind of feel like also at some level, like we've been given a lot of time for our lives, especially in our era where we live a long time. We've got a lot of time there. And from a soul perspective, like what are we supposed to be using that time for in terms of our own evolution? Yeah, part of it is doing our calling, whatever that is, doing the work in the world. But I think a big chunk of the time that we're given specifically for that wrestling with our calling, not living our calling, denying it, and then coming to accept it. That's actually like a very important part of the human journey, to not live our authenticity and then choose to come home to it.
That's beautiful. And I'm like, how many resistance have I had to my callings? Like it's fascinating that I love the permission and the reminder that that is part of the path. And for you, part of the Playing Big framework of those, what would you say has been the loudest for you in hiding your own voice in making that transition or surrendering to the call?
There's been different rounds of it. So the first one, there was resisting to writing. There was resisting like writing because that felt too scary. There was resisting being explicitly spiritual in my work. There is some still resistance to being as political is probably the wrong word, but talking squarely about social issues and sort of societal norms. That's still like a form of resistance I'm working through. There is resistance to some of the lighter aspects of my calling. Like I really enjoy being on camera. I grew up doing theater. Like there's a whole fun, light, very performative side that I resist because it is very joyful for me. And I think, in different ways, we all resist some of our most kind of vitalizing experiences because we are a little more, at least I know I'm a little more comfortable numbed out than with the level of vitality that I get from doing things that are really joyful for me. It's joyful, but it's also a little bit, it makes you very present. And that's not every part of us. I think there are parts of us that would rather numb out for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah, those have all been, forms of resistance for me.
Yeah. And you talked about resistance in writing, and I'm so curious for you. You have the book, you have the course, and you speak, and it's all on one topic. What was the original vision when you were first planting the seed? Was it, I want a course, I want a book?
No.
What was the original vision?
And, as much as I am someone who really likes vision, I really operate, I like visioning processes. I like that. But I also have found in my own life that pieces come one at a time, and I very much experience it like I'm walking on a cobblestone path and the path is very foggy and I can see one cobblestone ahead at a time. And if I try and understand the whole path and the surroundings and everything, that's not really about vision. That's like about a need for control, which that's one thing I have to say. I thankfully don't have that. I like the creative process. I like the unknown of it. So for me, the vision was like, I want to do something in this personal growth world. That was it. I was like thinking, was there anything else? It was kind of just like, I want to have something to do with these new age bookstores and these retreat centers. I knew then I started because I was working with a coach and I was doing a lot of coaching exercises through my coaching training. So then I started to get there's something here about going into my feminine self more. And sometimes the pieces of the vision we get are they're not easily explainable. They're not things where we see what our future resume is going to look like. I'm remembering at that time early on. So this is before leaving my old job, it was just well, I know I'm not going to be wearing tweed blazers anymore. I'm going to be wearing lavender. And I can remember when I bought this silky lavender shirt that I couldn't really have worn to my current job. And it was very significant in terms of this is where we're going, the feeling of this color, which is very ethereal and felt very feminine to me and too showy in a way to wear in my current job. And then it's and my hair is going to be long. I'm not going to have this professional bob. So that's what I was that's really what I was going with. And then I used a lot of the inner mentor tool, which is now a big part of Playing Big, which is sort of having a sense of yourself 20 years in the future. So not the immediate, but 20 years out. And then just continually asking yourself, well, okay, so that woman, what choice would she make in this situation I'm in right now? Or which fork in the road here? If I do A today or B today, if I write today or I don't write today, if I make plans with this friend or that friend, which of these choices are bringing me closer to becoming who she is? Mm. And that's how I was directing my life for a while. And then quite honestly, I thought, well, I'll get this coaching certification and I'll do that. And then we'll see where that goes. And then what was happening is in my coaching classes, we were always we were always coaching other students or they were coaching. And every time, so I was, constantly being in these dyads where some other coach in training would be what do you really want? What's your vision? What is your, blah, 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 all those kind of coaching questions. And the answer that would always come to me was, write. I'm supposed to write. And I didn't like it. I was why is that voice telling me to write? Because I'm in the middle of this coaching training and the plan here is maybe we're going to build this coaching business or whatever. And it was write. So I actually for a while paused my coaching training and just focused on writing and blogging about personal growth topics, but just seeing what would come and really didn't know where that was leading. And then I felt I wanted to write a book because I didn't know what I wanted to say in the book, but I knew my life had been changed by personal growth books and I wanted to be in that space. Yeah. And so that's what led to the early years of blogging. So I'm a very nonlinear vision person. And then the courses and all of that, all of that came very organically as I sort of discovered what I wanted to say and then learned more about kind of my field and the marketplace and what was working as delivery vehicles for the kind of work I wanted to do.
And I love that write was the first step, and the intention or the vision was I want to write a book, but it's actually writing the blog post came first, then delivering the online program, and then the book, right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And because then I just really fell in love with blogging once I started blogging, and I knew, I had learned from the publishing world that, like, from talking to a few people in the publishing world, that I'm only going to get a better book deal and the book process is only going to be better the more I've built a reading audience prior to that. So I was happy to just continue doing that. And I loved the spontaneity of blog posts. I loved the immediacy of like being able to write something and publish it that day. I found it worked really well for me at that phase in my life where I did have a full-time job. I didn't have kids yet. So I could kind of like wake up at 5, spend a few hours writing, press publish, go to my job, and feel very creatively fulfilled by those early mornings. So that whole rhythm, worked quite well for me in the first couple of years. Yeah. And then the courses. And then when I felt like, okay, we've now heard from hundreds of people that these courses are changing their lives. We know the tools are really working. This feels like a very logical time to bring the material to more people through a book.
And was there anything challenging about making that translation from what's in the online program to what's inside the book? There's always this, like, it's one message, it's one big idea, but then finding how to translate, or like, what's the free opt-in and what's the paid course and what's inside the book that's, reaching,
right,
the masses at these different price points. I'm curious if there was any challenges around that process for you, or if it felt pretty clear.
Yeah, there was definitely questions like, okay, well, right now I have a business that's based around these courses, and that's largely my livelihood. And so if we do a book, is that going to be too much of a replication of the courses? And will I still be able to have that business? But I felt kind of like, well, if the book, ends up making the courses not relevant, I will find something else to, I'll evolve my business model. It still felt very clear that it was important to have the book out there. But what happened, which really was not what we anticipated, was now I would say about, upwards of 80% of the women who take the Playing Big course take it because they read the book. Which was a huge surprise, and took us a while. My team and I, took us a while to wrap our minds around, because for years there, people would find us through the blog or through my online writing and presence, and then take the course. And, that was pre the book coming out. So it's just been a big shift that now the book, thankfully, has really been making its way in the world. It's translated quite widely around the world. People are amazing at giving this book to each other and to other women in their lives. So it has a real life of its own, which I feel so good about. So we just kind of have this steady stream that comes to the course for a deeper experience of, and a more experiential and community-based kind of experience of the material in the book.
I love that, because I feel people struggle, for that low price point offer. And they're like, well, will that cannibalize your livelihood? And you're like, actually, it enriches it and brings more people to the work. So is there anything that you've seen that has worked really well from the experiential side of people being a part of the online program when it comes to the community part that you've seen that you guys have done really well? And is there any lessons or things that you've learned that maybe didn't work so well with the community element in place?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked about that, because people rarely ask about that. And I have a lot to say about teaching online courses. And, it's because it's part of my work and something now I've been doing for, 7 years. We're really proud of the fact that most the vast majority of people stay with the course, that we have a really high rate of people digesting all of the curriculum. The course has always been 6 months long, which is really long for an online program. And it's 3 months if I'm ever having a baby. Has happened every few years, but I've had 2 kids, but it's generally been 6 months. And so in terms of experiential learning, which I feel like, so if anyone's listening and you're in the coaching world and you are doing any kind of adult learning where the point is not just for people to get new information, but actually to change who they are, to change how they operate, to build new behaviors or habits or beliefs. You are talking about, I think, what's best suited to experiential learning, meaning you want them experiencing and practicing new skills and behaviors through your course, which is the opposite of just absorbing a lot of information, a lot of content. Mm-hmm. So for us, the amount of content is very small and distilled, because I know that people are busy, and I am not trying to be like my graduate school professors where I hand people a big packet of like 300 pages of reading for every, week. Like, right. That's not, and I really learned from my own coaching training, you can give people 5 pages of reading, but if it's the right 5 pages and the right things for them to practice as they move through their day, and it's actually small and focused enough that they will practice those things, that's where you're going to get transformative impact. So that's how we approach every module. There's a little bit of content to absorb, but there's a lot of journaling, worksheets, exercises, like practices to do in your life. There's reminders that people get by text. So when they're busy, they can like get re-anchored to, what they're working on. So it's all like that. It's like very practical and applied. And then we also I'm live with the group through the process. So we do a lot of spotlight coaching and Q&A and discussion, so people can learn from each other's stories and kind of what they're seeing in real time there. So that's been a really, that I would say that is the biggest thing, is like, it's not about the quantity. It actually, you're often giving people more value if you are very clear about like, what are the few important things they really need to know here? And then what are the skills they're practicing? So like an example would be, we're learning a little bit about what the inner critic is and why we have it. But then we're learning, okay, here's through journaling, like they're identifying their own inner critic and what it sounds like. Then we're learning a few tools of here's what you do in the moment when your inner critic comes up. So an example would be, we might learn a little bit about what the inner critic is and why we have it. But then we'd spend the majority of our time would be, okay, let's now have everybody do a little writing together about what your inner critic says, and then we'll discuss a little bit, and then we'll learn some practices for what do you do in the moment when your inner critic comes up. And then we have 2 weeks where everyone is applying that learning and sharing their questions and their challenges and practicing it, so it becomes a new habit before we move on to something else. Like, we're taking one thing at a time so we can actually produce change in ourselves and our lives. And I think that highly experiential nature is why we've had such a high participation and retention rate in the course.
Is there anything that you've done intentionally, and I know you are so intentional with what you do, to create a space that feels safe for them to process these transformations that are very vulnerable, very personal, but still in a group setting with, a global group of women from around the world processing, their inner darkest secrets and fears and criticisms? Is there anything that you've done to create this space of safety to have those conversations?
I think a couple things have helped. One, we do have a norm of confidentiality, so people can share what they're learning outside of the course, but everyone's agreeing to not share specifics of what they're hearing from others. A second norm that's more unconventional that we have is there's no giving or asking for advice in our course. So it's pretty cool to get a big group of women together and be like, we're going to share challenges. We're going to be talking about all this stuff, but guess what? We're not going to be giving each other any advice. And if you ask for advice, someone's going to gently remind you, like, and that's really important to me for 2 reasons. One, women are told in a million ways, go get the answer outside of yourself. And some of it sounds really positive. Find a mentor, find a mastermind, find a blah, 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 And that can all be really helpful, but our world has put enough emphasis on that already. So this is a different space where people learn how to access their own highest wisdom and clarity, and we want the focus to be on that. And we want to sort of challenge the knee-jerk reaction a lot of us have to ask for advice when we're facing uncertainty or fear, and instead use the tools. So that's one piece. And then on the other end, I want to teach women more about how you can really give support and show up for other women in other ways besides giving advice. So we talk about, of course, before, putting this norm in practice, we talk about, so what are the other ways we're going to support each other? How can you really show up as a listener? How can you express support? How can you cheer somebody on? How can you maybe even share your own story and your lessons learned, but not at all in the form of advice? And I think that goes a huge, long way towards creating that safe space, because you can't have like crosstalk and static, especially with a virtual program, in any setting, but especially with the potential for just all kinds of not great stuff to happen.
Right. Unfiltered noise.
Yeah.
I was just grinning from ear to ear. I love that you're allowing them to hear their inner wisdom, their inner mentor. And also, it's pressing pause on collecting everyone else's ideas that you talk about in the book. And you're really, really putting that into practice. I think it's so beautiful. And I'm like, can you write a playing big for girls when your daughter's 10?
Yeah. A lot of moms have asked me about that over the years. And I'm thankful that a lot of people who work with girls are taking the material and making it their own. So, I've visited schools where the 7th graders do inner mentor and the 8th graders teach the 5th graders inner critic and, all kinds of like cool applications. And we may in the future do something. For now, I feel like my expertise is so much in the area of women, and we have so many more women to reach that I'm letting, I'm happy to just see that people who work with girls take our program, or we also have a facilitators training where we focus on how to do this work with others. So we have a lot of people who work with girls who come to that. So that's how that's happening now. And maybe we'll be able to be more engaged with it in the future.
I love it. And you've made a very intentional decision to go deep on this one message of playing big. It's the course, it's the book. And I'm curious, what has been exciting and also challenging about really sticking to one big idea?
Yeah, it hasn't been challenging, which is interesting, because I would say prior to this, I am much more like I am someone who I have a lot of ideas. I still have a lot of ideas. I enjoy the creative process. But, for me, there's been a couple things. One is like, I've just always had this phrase come up, which is being a good steward of my work. And I feel that a lot of creative people, and I don't know if there's a gender piece around this, but there's like a lot of creative people, we kind of abandon our own work sometimes. Yeah. And we can really be more comfortable with the creative phase. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that for me, I also knew I wanted to be able to feel like, okay, I've really brought this quite far into its potential in terms of how many people it can reach. And I just have nowhere near feeling that way yet. And every time, for example, just last week, I was doing a program with women faculty at a college. And there was a woman who came on and was a scientist and was saying, every time I'm writing a journal article, I just get this panicked voice saying, there's going to be an error and it's going to be exposed and And we were able to just talk for like 5 minutes about, okay, I would call that an inner critic voice, and here's some things, here's what it is, and here's what you can do about it. And she's just like, wow, that really helps. And it's like, every time I hear that, like, wait a minute, there's a 5-minute conversation we can have that is really helpful to women doing incredible things. Like, I'm not going to quit until we've reached millions more women with that conversation. And so for now, that feels more compelling than starting something from scratch. And I guess also because of blogging and Instagram and all that stuff, like, I do get my creative juices like satisfied every time I create posts from scratch every day. And I do get to like process my own new ideas, and, things feel fresh. I think maybe without that, it would feel different. But with that in the mix, I'm quite satisfied.
I love that you're like, here's an outlet where I can still express those fresh ideas. And because that was a question that I was really curious about, is how do you stay creatively connected to the work when, the online program is, you said 7 years that you've been doing it.
Yeah.
So how do you, it sounds like social media is one way of in that writing. Is there anything else that you do to stay creatively connected to the work where it doesn't feel like?
Yeah. Well, so because I'm on live with people, it always feels so fresh. Like, because maybe I've taught, I don't know what now, like maybe 10 cohorts of the courses or something like that. But if I just, let's say I just did the inner mentor visualization with people, and then a woman comes on in one of our sessions, course sessions, and I can see her face and she's explaining to me what happened in her visualization, and we're going to do some coaching and unpack that and unpack what that means for her. That's a completely new experience because she's a new person. And if I am really present and listening, I'm going to hear something in one of her questions or one of her insights that could help me, see the content afresh or realize a little nuance that I haven't written about before. And that might become the jumping off point for a blog post. So it feels really fresh. And then of course I'm changing. So for me, like right now is the first year I'm teaching the course after having my second child. I'm in a completely new place. And so I have to say, quite honestly, I think I am loving teaching the material now more than I ever have before. And I feel like the quality of what people are getting is just better. I'm more I'm completely relaxed now when I'm teaching it because it's so integrated. So I don't know what's happening. It kind of surprises me, but it just feels like the richness and the cohesion of it keeps increasing for me. So and I'm sure that's not the path for every person with whatever they're working on right now, but I do think it's certainly a possibility that we can pursue.
Yeah, I feel that you are painting the possibility and the depth of committing to the craft and to your body of work. It's a perspective shift that I'm feeling of ooh, I'm changing every day. So my business model doesn't need to change every day,
Right.
The stories and the tools and the lens that you're sharing, allow that to be where the aliveness comes from, or this is a new human being with a beating heart that has a different story. I just think that the energy around what you're sharing will create a perspective and possibility shift for people that are hearing this, because it feels normal and typical to let's change directions and let's pivot and let's do all of these pieces, which can be important. But I think this sustainability, and I know that we've talked about I actually would love for you to talk about, when you have something that you could actually scale it.
Right.
If you keep shifting and pivoting in all of these new directions that you actually don't have an opportunity to scale. Could you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And scale has always been really important to me. It's the reason that, I started teaching courses early in, kind of in my journey doing this work versus just continuing with one-on-one. It's the reason I, wrote a book. It's reaching a lot of people has always felt important to me. So it is a value for me. I think, also there is a gender piece around women often don't think about the level of scale that male entrepreneurs do. And there's no reason why we shouldn't. I think, I'm interested in social change at scale. It's why I went to business school, I went to business school as somebody with an English major and nonprofit background. I went to get an MBA primarily because I saw that the corporate world was where things were operating at the largest scale, and that there was there was technology for organizations behind that, meaning technology in the broadest sense. There was organizational structure, and there was a way that resources were allocated and all that allowed things to be global and quite impactful when they came through the business world. And so I went to business school to learn about that. So yeah, it just is important to me. And I think the other thing Judd, I'm really curious what you think about this, like that when you are offering something that people A, want, B, know they want, C, find helpful, D, you found a price that, works to sustain a business and that makes sense to your customer to pay. Like when you've gotten all those things right, you're delivering a product or service and it's working for you and for your customer, that is very special. Like I don't take that lightly. And there were other offerings, like other ways I had sliced and diced the content before I taught the Playing Big course that didn't work for people as much, maybe just offering this topic or that topic, or offering it, as a smaller offering, a different price point. In fact, for me, like a lower price point never worked very well compared to the higher price point was like much more, and a bigger offering with more content was much more appealing for my audience. So there were all these things that like took a few years to figure out what was really going to resonate for my audience. And I just know, especially because I live in Silicon Valley and I see the startup world like all the time in many different ways all around me, it's not a small thing when you just find one product that people want to buy, right? That works for them. And so I don't take that lightly. I don't think that I can just like pick the next thing and it would necessarily work out that way. There would be a lot of tinkering to find the form of it and the price point and the packaging and the delivery mechanism that would work. So I just feel it's something special the way this is working now that's worth continuing to scale and see through. But I'm curious, I'm thinking about your business journey and how there were also many different expressions of what you were doing before you could see like the real traction and resonance. And so how you think about that.
Yeah. So one, I just love the social change at scale because I think it's such an important conversation for women to hear. We lead with love and heart, and we care about humanity and transformation and all of that good stuff. So one, I just love you bringing that phrasing to the conversation. And I think, we have our mutual friend, Jonathan Fields, and, in the business world, we talk about product market fit. Right. And Jonathan Fields mentioned product maker fit. So that for me is really important. And I've, found different iterations of things and I'm like, okay, this is great, but it's not product maker fit. I'm not using my voice, which is I personally want to use my voice for good. This is why this podcast exists. This is why I love speaking on stages. And that didn't actually align with the Simple Green Smoothies model, where it's like, we've got the price, we've got the market, all of those things. And so that's where I know that I've made my shift. But I so agree with you on that. It's actually not very easy to find that price point that works and that one product. And I mean, with Fresh Start 21, it was just rinse and repeat. You can actually build a system and a team to support the launches where then you as the leader, the CEO, the visionary can just find more ways to reach more people with that. But if you're constantly tinkering behind the scenes, all your work is just in that. You're like tinkering all of the stuff, where now it's like, yes, we can reach more people because we have something that works. We know that it gets people results. We know the price is right. Like I think we don't realize how hard and challenging that is. And so I love that you're bringing up that conversation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I love bringing in the product maker fit too, which I would say it is true that with Playing Big, like it's a good, I also really enjoy and still feel very aligned with the work, as well as, getting to see the impact it's having on the people I want to reach. So it's both.
Yeah. So I'm curious for you. I know I want to be able to wrap up soon, but I'm curious, you've been in the online space for a while. And I'm curious, as the online space has changed and evolved, there's more information out there. What's been on your radar right now?
You laugh. I'm like, this is, so one of the things for me is I am like the last one on the block to accept that technology is changing, or to like accept, I'm so anti like anything that feels trendy or gimmicky, I immediately had like a knee-jerk no reaction to. And so then, it took me years, the first couple years of blogging, like I would only blog on my own site. And like finally after like 2 years of being like, okay, I've literally been blogging for 2 years and my subscriber base has gone up from the 33 friends and family who first subscribed to now, after 2 years of like consistent blogging, or a year and a half, I think maybe it was something like that. It was then 150 people. And I said, I think that I am now ready to like listen to some of this tactical advice, which was that maybe you should write a guest post. Maybe you should like post a link at the end of your post. Maybe you should have an opt-in. Took me like that much, like, okay, like now this is frustrating enough. And I accepted that like these things, to write a guest post doesn't mean that I'm a sellout,
Yes, I totally feel you.
So I'm kind of now like going like, maybe I should like find out what Instagram is about. Like that's where I am. And I'm like, the Instagram stories thing, like I can't even, I know everyone's like already now, like, been like learning about that. I'm just like, let's go check out that Instagram thing.
Right.
Still have never like really run any kind of paid ads. So there's a lot of things that I'm looking at now just because I am interested in reaching people, where I'm having to kind of accept like, how are people finding things in 2018? So I do feel like, I came up in the blogging era and that's what my whole model was based around. And so I'm like sort of now looking around and being like, where are people hanging out now? And what are they doing now? And then, and I think this is really important, then I am filtering everything I learn through what feels aligned with me, what's the way we want to do this, which I'm sure will be quite different from the norm, but we'll take some little pieces from like what I'm learning about all these new ways that people are communicating and reaching audiences.
Yeah, I love that. Very similar for me, my own experience with Simple Green Smoothies. We were able to grow, the online community with our email list over 355,000 and over 400,000 followers on Instagram. And there was actually this sense of pride that we were able to do that without paid advertising and holding on to it, of like, well, let's not shift that because it takes away from this sense of pride of like organic traffic and being able to just add so much value. But again, what I think that I'm hearing from you, and then also what I'm learning in my own journey, is if the intention is to reach as many people as possible, knowing that people's lives are going to change, that it's okay to explore these different strategies to reach more people. It's just making sure that we're doing it in a place of good intention, right? Of the quote that you shared at the beginning. Can you just repeat it one more time?
Yeah, it's just the prayer, the intention, may I be a representative of love.
Yeah. That if we can use those tools and strategies with that prayer, with that intention, it shifts. It doesn't make it this like scheme, right?
Yeah. And that prayer and staying to that intention and just staying in touch with ourselves, I think tells us what to say no to, and I do feel like just across the board with sort of the different forms of marketing, the different opportunities that come my way, I do probably we say no to like 99% of things. And that feels really right. And that, I hope that doesn't change. And then it's just figuring out like, okay, what are the small pieces here of like what feels right for us to continue reaching people and to be current with where the technology is now and what people are doing and all of that. So yeah, I mean, I'm just right now we're creating my new website. My website's from 2010. I mean, like, and it's done great mileage for me over these past 8 years. But I'm kind of like, it might be time to get rid of the big margins on the right and left.
Right.
And, like, it might be time to just look, it's just like, looking like I'm in the decade we're in. That might feel nice to me at least.
There's also something that's being told is like when you have something that people want and it solves a problem and creates transformation and change in their lives, that we don't have to obsess over all the pieces that everyone says that you should do when it comes to building a business, that there are some things that, where people obsess over, like a logo or the typography. It's just, let's get out and like serve.
Exactly. And that goes back to your hiding question. I mean, those things can be hiding strategies, especially for good student, good girl, like those of us who were really socialized and the more effort I put in and the more I think about it and the more right I get it, the better it will be. And that turns out to not be true in our playing big journeys in our careers. It's more like the more willing I am to fail and feel afraid and do it anyway and have it be messy and improve it from there and all of that, like that's what actually gets us moving. And so it's a big orientation shift.
Yeah. And is there something that you've recently, because you talked about 99% of the things that we say no to, is there something specific, a story that you could share that you've said no to recently that I think would be helpful for the listeners to hear? One, women saying no to things and creating those boundaries.
Sure. I mean, and again, one is like, I don't know if this is polarizing to throw out there, but the one that comes to mind immediately is retargeting.
Yeah.
Because, that is a very common tool now. So for people who don't know what that means, it's like, when you visit a website and then you see an ad for the website you just visited, shows up in your Facebook and you're like, how did they know I was looking at those shoes? Or you see a Facebook ads for people whose email list you're on. So all of that depends. Well, a lot of that depends on choosing to set up ads that way. And in some cases, like if you have an email list, then Facebook would need your email list in order to target the people on your email list. That's one example of something where I feel like almost everyone in my field is doing that. And I'm just like, like when people signed up for my email list, I don't really think they wanted Facebook to have that information about whose email list they signed up for. And I certainly didn't ask them that. And so, no, we're not doing that, no matter how effective it is. That's just one example of that kind of category.
Yeah, no, it's a great example of just being in integrity and alignment with what feels right for now. And that can shift and expand over time, but it's you truly embodying, listening to that inner mentor, that future Tara, 20 years from now. So I would love to know, what is the vision that you are moving towards now?
Well, I'm just thinking of some of what's coming with our new website, because I think it really comes through. So continuing to do this work, helping women step forward and share their gifts and their ideas and their creativity and their critiques and their innovations boldly in the world. And then for me personally, really kind of coming back up for air after, having had 2 kids. It's just coming back like more fierce, more embodied, more fierce, just more fierce. There's just a like, I think that for me, there's like a girlishness that's now gone at this stage in my life where I just feel like some mature womanhood space that I'm coming into that just opens up some new possibilities in my work and it certainly has in my life. That's very exciting. Feels really good.
Oh, I can feel it. I can see it. And I'm so, so excited. And I can't wait for everyone to see your new website. It's going to be amazing. So I would love for you, if there is anything that we haven't covered that you would like to share before we say goodbye.
Well, maybe we'll close with, just as a note to close on, because we didn't share it yet, just how I like to define playing big. And that can be a takeaway for everyone to think about, because sometimes people hear that term and feel like, it means I'm supposed to be doing more, dressing out more, doing things that are bigger and get bigger recognition. And that's not what it's about at all, in my view. So the definition of playing big that we work with in the course and in the book is that playing big is being more loyal to your dreams than to your fears. So you can think about what that means for you to be more loyal to your dreams, which has nothing to do with whether they get achieved or not, and has everything to do with where your allegiance is, and where your center of gravity is. So let's close with that.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. You are an embodiment of fierce grace. And I'm so thankful to call you friend, and we'll talk soon.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. And thanks to everyone who listened today.
Thank you so much for your heart and attention in listening to Lead with Love. If this message, leading with love in life and business, and remembering the humans and beating hearts behind the numbers and all of that good stuff, I would love for you to take the time to leave an honest review. It would mean the world to me, and it also helps more people find out about the goodness and helping spreading more love in the world, which we really, really need. So I would really appreciate that, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.